Hello, one and all. Welcome to this podcast, The Teacher in Classroom 21. In fact, our inaugural podcast of The Teacher in Classroom 21. My name's James. I'm one of your three hosts for the show today, and I'm going to introduce you to the other two. So first of all, we have Marta Soteras Munn with us today, who's desperate to tell us all about herself.
Hello, it's Mun, not Mun.
Sorry.
But hello, I'm Marta. I am the person in charge of MFL in the Ever Learner.
Mm-hmm.
In my past, I've been a teacher, and I still consider myself a teacher. In fact, that's, even if I'm not in the classroom, that's what I do. I teach. My specialism is Spanish, as I'm from Barcelona. And before that, I was a freelance translator and interpreter. So my life's been very closely linked with languages throughout.
Got it. Interesting. We have Mike Pryor with us today as well.
Hey.
Say hello, Mike.
Hi.
Tell us a bit about yourself.
I taught for 5 years. I think 5 years before I joined the Ever Learner. And I was head of department for two to three of those. The third year I was head of department of one, so I don't really consider that head of department, but so two of those head of department in kind of an interesting school. It was a free school, so it had a slightly different political kind of slant to it, and it was also an all-through school, so it had students from 4 to 16.
Okay. And as I said at the start, I'm James, James Sims. I am also, like these two guys, a teacher by trade, a teacher by background. I was in the classroom for 17 years. I started as a PE teacher, and I moved into kind of more classroom teaching. And in my kind of latter years, which makes me sound very old, I'm actually not that young, but I'm not that old either. But in my more recent years, I've been working in a business called the Ever Learner, and the Ever Learner is really trying really hard to provide a service to learners and to schools that allows a classroom to be a much more modern place than perhaps it's been in the past. And that kind of brings us to the crux of what this show is about. We want to have a conversation within these broadcasts. We want to have a conversation with the guests who are going to join us, Mike and Marta, today, but in the future, who knows? We want to have a conversation about, if we were to pinpoint today what the best classroom on earth was, what would that classroom be like? And we want to discuss that, we want to debate that, we want to agree with people on that, we want to disagree with people on that, so that what we come out of from our conversations and what we can publish to any teacher that happens to be interested is a model of a classroom that is the highest performing classroom on the planet. So I'll just open that up to you guys first of all. What's your interpretation of an intent and a motive like that?
Well, I guess first thing to clarify the starting point, the current model as we see it is one which is heavily transmission based. So
when you say the current model, do you mean if you were to somehow to walk into the average classroom in the average school, what you'd see?
Yeah, I guess so, and mainly secondary schools, I would say. When we think of this model, we generally come from that perspective. That's our starting point, is a typical secondary school classroom in the UK, but equally in primary school as well, although it is slightly different. And that current model that we will talk about is one which is heavily transmission based, i.e. you have a teacher who currently holds the information, and then they tell that to a group of students who generally receive the information and are expected to learn it in a one-pace-fits-all kind of model. So all the students do basically the same task at the same time as directed by the teacher. And I think generally what we want to try and get out of this podcast is that there's lots of research, both anecdotal and more formal, which suggests that there's problems with that model. And whilst lots of attempts have been made to implement changes to the current model, we actually need to rewrite the model rather than just patch over the issues with the model.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Anything you'd add to that, Marta, before I chuck my two penneth in?
No. It's I think Mike has summarised it really well.
I mean,
You're welcome.
Marty, you worked in a languages department, a languages corridor. What was the average lesson? What if you walked in on an average day into the average lesson into the average teacher's classroom along that corridor? What did you see?
Well, I suppose the language classroom has generally been characterized by, maybe compared to other subjects, probably there tends to be maybe more the presence of more of activity, games, that sort of thing, participation. There's also the other extreme, which is just grammar and translation and that sort of thing. But probably the presence of student involvement ideally is there, but it's also characterized very much by a one pace fits all. Now we are all doing this. Now we are all practicing this. Now split into little groups, and we're all going to be doing pretty much the same.
And who decided those things?
The teacher, obviously. So yes, I think being and of course, by language is a skill rather than for a language is a skill rather than I need to know all these facts and all these things. So I think that having a classroom at a one pace fits all. It really have a negative impact in the languages classroom. Because students need to practice different things. Some are better at one thing, some are better at another, and the traditional classroom doesn't really give you enough flexibility.
And I guess that's one of the most basic premises that we're going to explore amongst all of these conversations, is that a typical classroom as it's been in place since the 19th century in what we know as the Western world, and I think the broader world, has at the heart of it an idea that students follow courses rather than courses following students. And that is the idea that, many times, not criticizing anyone else because I did this for many years, that a group of students who happen to be of approximately the same age follow a rhythm of a course which is set usually before those students have ever even been met. And we try and differentiate a little bit within that context. And I guess what we're trying to do here is we're trying to challenge that idea. And that I don't even think it's an idea. I think it's an assumption. I think that if we were to walk into any classroom, just about let's just say we're in the UK today. So if we were to walk into just about any classroom in the UK today, or the vast majority, let's put it that way, we'd see roughly the same things. We'd see roughly a space which accommodates about 30 people. Maximum. We'd see roughly a space that was rectangular or square. I guess a square is a rectangle, but you know what I mean. We would see a space which had at the front of it a teacher zone where they'd have a whiteboard, a computer, a presentational area, smartboard, something like that. And we'd have some kind of audience student sitting area where the students actually receive that, as you said earlier on, Mike, transmission. And I guess one of the basic premises we're getting at is that pacing of a classroom, which is designed to transmit a course or a series of experiences at some kind of average level with a bit of differentiate bolted on, can be far exceeded today by tweaking the parameters of what we've got. So I don't know, do you guys think that's a fair description? I mean, if someone's going to criticize what I just said, where would their criticism lie, do you think?
I think there's one important thing we should do as we go along, which is to clarify some terms. And one thing we said earlier is that the pace of a course is set by the teacher. I guess when we say the teacher, we don't necessarily mean a specific teacher who decides that pace, although that is often the case. But it's more that the pace of the course is centrally set, as opposed to set by the student themselves. So the pace of a course, if you start the course on day A and you finish the course with an exam 2 years later on day B, then the course is basically written for you in terms of how much you're going to move at the pace you're going to move through that course, because you have to cover a certain amount of material in a certain amount of time. So the average pace is the pace that most students go at. So that isn't necessarily set by the specific teacher. It's just set by a person somewhere, generally a combination of somebody who's responsible for timetabling and planning and
or exam dates.
All those kinds of factors create that environment where the teacher has to pace in a certain way. In the current model at least. But what we're arguing is that actually that teacher doesn't have to pace it in that way. If we hand over the pace and the direction of the course to the student, then it's possible for the student to take longer or move faster through certain elements of that course. Although all students are going to sit that exam on the same day currently, it's important that one of the things I'm careful of is that we aren't teacher bashing. We're not suggesting that the teacher in the classroom is at fault. It's just that teacher is working within a system which is at fault. So that's one thing I'm cautious of.
I think it's actually very important to say to anyone who doesn't have an educator's background or hasn't worked in schools, colleges. Generally speaking, the general experience I've had, I've as a teacher and as what you might loosely call a consultant, I've worked now in hundreds of schools, and I very, very, very rarely meet a teacher who is not completely committed, who's not completely hardworking. So this is a contextual conversation that we're having here. I mean, I would really not want to give the impression of that teachers are not good or good enough or that kind of thing. I generally find that teachers respond to the environment that they're in, and they cope around the environmental or is parametrical a real word, or I'm not sure either, or the parameters in which surround them.
Yeah, but I was going to say, I mean, as an example, we were saying about the one pace fits all, and many teachers will probably say to us, well, I work incredibly hard to make sure that I really stretch the students who can move quicker, and I really give support to those students who lag behind. And of course, we know that teachers work incredibly hard at doing this.
And I would summarise, if I may interrupt, Marta, I would summarise our response to that as teachers do that brilliantly in spite of the model, not because of the model. And what I guess we're looking to advocate in here is we want to advocate an achievable, realistic model which has that behaviour built in structurally, and the behaviours of the teacher to support individual learners, to support people at different positions, different experiences, different levels of knowledge and skill, is an intrinsic factor within the model. And I think it's very, very important that we discriminate against those two things. We are, as you said a moment ago, Mike, we are not criticising teachers who, in spite of a very, very rigid, limited model, are doing magnificent work very, very frequently. What we're trying to do is give the conditions where all teachers have much more structural tendency to produce those kinds of behaviours.
And also where teachers don't have to spend hours and hours and hours and hours doing 3 different lessons instead of 1, because I have to prepare these extra bit of paper and these extra, and they got to artificially create 3 different things for 3 different levels of students.
And even if a teacher does it, even if you think of like a really brilliantly differentiated lesson which covers for, let's say you've got a group of 25 and you could theoretically group those into 5 groups of 5 who work at 5 different levels. You'd consider that to be a fairly well...
That would be impressive, wouldn't it?
It would be if you walked into that and you could see 5 different, whether it's differentiated by task or outcome or however you choose to separate those tasks up. You would consider that to be really, really quite impressive. But like you said earlier, teachers have to work incredibly hard to do that. And if a teacher's teaching 5 of those lessons per day, then it's kind of it's impossible for a teacher to maintain that level all the way through. So it typically becomes a lesson that you do once in a blue moon, as opposed to your bread and butter
when you're being observed.
And those lessons often come out at that critical time, don't they?
An interview is a classic too. No?
Yeah. But my point is, even if that teacher works really hard to produce that lesson, which is differentiated 5 ways, it's not even that good. You're still assuming that 5 of your students are effectively the same. And I think the issue comes when we try and talk about some notion of a personalised journey or some personalised education for each individual student that's so at odds with the current model that the patch that we consider differentiation goes so far, but it's not really good enough to pick up. So you end up with teachers in a model where they're never good enough, because even if they work really hard and even if they could produce that level of differentiation every single lesson, it's still five times as inefficient as people really want it to be. So differentiation is arguably one of the most important and the best patches that we have to put over the current model, but it isn't anywhere near good enough. So we have to just turn that model inside out in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's really well put, Mike, because you're right. If we try and patch over something like differentiation, which apparently at its peak in a group of 25, we might get down to a task which is relevant to 5 different individuals approximately, then clearly that is not an individualized outcome. It's a small group individualized outcome, but it's not an individualized outcome.
Well, if the gold standard is that each student can work at their own pace at exactly what they need at the moment.
Having the exact right challenge level they need in every single moment of their education is the achievement and or the objective. And it sounds like that's going to be really rigorous and tough for the student. And the answer is it is, but great enjoyment is going to be derived from the fact that you are truly learning the thing which is most relevant to you in a particular moment. And every step you take, that's a song, isn't it? Who sang that?
Police. The Police.
Yeah, that was a good song. But every step you take, every step you take.
We're getting onto the karaoke that you mentioned.
Yeah.
What was the punch? Was it every step? What was the punch? What was the?
It's a bit like a stalker. Every
bond you break,
I'll be watching
you.
Oh yeah, I've gone off that.
Yeah.
I'd never. So when that was written in the 80s, that was kind of normalised.
Anything was normal in the 80s.
In the 80s. Anyway, let's not go down that line because
this is only good for the blooper reel.
So I think what's relevant here, because as Mike said, neither do we want to teacher bash, nor do we just want to criticize. And I think it's very important now to give a context to anyone listening to us of what we believe is the alternative. And I guess a little bit of backstory is important here. In 2000, and let me get this right, in 2012, 2013, I started doing something that I didn't know why I was doing it. And I started recording all of my teaching. So the recording, the way that happened was, rather than me going into a classroom and standing at a whiteboard and saying 2 + 2 = 4, or the sky is blue, or whatever I was writing on that whiteboard, instead of doing that with all the students watching me and following me along making notes, I made exactly the same teaching on a digital blackboard and recorded it. Now, I didn't really know why I was doing that at that point. I didn't have any plans for the impact that was going to have, but the output of that was that all of a sudden my students seemed to be learning better from my teaching via the videos, all going at an individual rhythm, taking the videos when they needed them, rather than listening to me stand at the front of the class when I decided was the moment to teach that thing. So they were getting the same teaching. The variable was the same, but the parameters were different because they could access it when they needed, including in the lesson. They could repeat it, and they could, and importantly, they could pause it and drag it back and drag it forward. So they were getting still, I hope, good quality teaching, but they could use that teaching as often, as frequently, in any way that they saw fit. And basically what that did to my classroom over time, we're talking about over 3, 4, 5 years, it meant that I didn't need to stand at the front of the classroom anymore and transmit information to students. And that is when the classroom for me changed fundamentally from what a classroom is supposed to be or assumed to be. So fairly soon after that kind of experience, well, fairly soon, 2 to 3 years after, I gradually developed a model which had, as I said before at the start of the show, it had no front teacher area because there was no teacher to transmit information. The teacher was in the device, or the teaching was in the device. And the classroom became purely about learning. And what I kind of gradually did was I separated the classroom into 4 zones. I'm going to give you a very quick snapshot of what those 4 zones were. So big picture, important things first of all, and you guys feel free to ask for clarification if I don't make anything clear enough. So first of all, students would arrive at my lesson still at the timetable time, 10 o'clock on a Tuesday, 2 o'clock on a Wednesday, whatever. And they'd walk into the classroom and they chose completely freely where they were going to study that day. And they transitioned between different parts of the classroom whenever the student decided it was the right moment to do so. Now, I know I realise some teachers are already going to be kind of like screaming, how can that possibly be the case? But please hear me out. So the way it works is that there's no transmission from the front happening in the classroom. So we separate the classroom into 4. One of those 4 zones is what we call the terminal zone. And I should be really clear here, terminals is where students go for teaching. They go to take, in my case, James's tutorials on the key content which is available all the time. So they do that on little cheap devices. They also go there for things like online research, online quizzing, fast data generating activities which are controlled by the student but tracked by me, the teacher. The second space was what we called the quiet study space. And this was a space where students can go any time at all to take any kind of paper-based resource, questions, worksheets, past paper questions, textbook research, anything. And those resources are constantly available to the students. The third space is what we call the play space, or the doing space. And that space is where students go and they take part, they experiment with things with their hands, they build, they discuss, they break, they make, they pin together, they match together laminate cards, they play games, they do Kagan structures, which we'll explore in another session. They do all those kind of things there. And finally, we had another space which was simply a table with 2 chairs and availability of a little whiteboard, and that's what we call the small group teaching space. And what that was used for is if I'm working with Marta as a student and Marta's getting confused in Spanish on the interrogative form,
yeah,
and she's got stuck with that, and the teaching from the tutorials has not got her to the level of mastery that we want her to be at, and maybe she's done some questions and she's getting stuck. Well, the data for that and the fact that I, as the teacher, have got time available, I would work specifically with Marta, specifically on the interrogative, even if the majority of the class were working on something different. And what I found was a couple of things in that classroom environment. I'll come back to certain conditions around it a bit later on, but the couple of things that I found in that classroom environment. Thing one, or output one, students were happier. Students could move. They could work at their own pace. They could work at their own challenge level, the exact challenge level. And when they got stuck, importantly, there was always help provided. So at the most stuck moment, their teacher was there to help and had time and freedom to help. Secondly, results, and I'm talking about exam performance, went off the chart. So over a period of 2 to 3 years, results that my groups and in some cases very large cohorts of students were achieving went from kind of being average to good to being very, 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 very close to the best. And I'm talking nationally. And off the back of that, numerous things happened. I got different jobs and ended up starting a business and blah, blah, blah. That stuff doesn't really matter. But the point is that by changing the parameters of the classroom model, dramatic differences happened in both the contentment of learners and the production or the performance of those learners. And it's for that reason, I think, that we sit here today and we say to anyone who might happen to listen to this, that our model as it is today, which I've roughly just described to you with a few gaps, but that model today, we are confident, is a far, far, far higher performing model of any average classroom that we described earlier on. And secondly, we now seek to refine and improve that model of a classroom every single day. And within that framework, we are going to annually publish a document called Classroom 21. Classroom 21 refers to the 21st century classroom. And Classroom 21 is going to be published every summer, Northern Hemisphere summer, and it is going to be the details we have of the best classroom as we know it today. And we encourage people to go and look at the 2017 version of that. That can be found at theeverlearner.com/education reimagined. Theeverlearner.com/education reimagined. Go and read our current publication. It's completely free. Go and have a look at it. But that's the model today that we already feel we know could be achieved very, very quickly. Thoughts?
Well, we also have, over the past year, been working with a group who we call the Everlearner Pioneers, who are teachers. You'd consider them early adopter teachers, I guess. They it's a group of about 30 to 40 teachers who are using this model every I don't know if they're using it every day, but certainly whenever the group that they've chosen to do it with arrives, they use this model. And we have, anecdotally at least, we have very positive feedback and very passionate teachers who give us very good feedback about how they see their position in the classroom as a much more relaxed and enjoyable one, how the students feel the same, how the results reflect reflect that positively. So yeah, this is not just us no longer in the classroom, sat in an office, criticizing and coming up with something which we are putting out as a theoretical idea. This is something which is actually being used, albeit by a very small number of people at the moment, but it's out there and it's being used, and it's going to grow. So,
well, that's an interesting. I mean, the pioneers, who I think they know, have our enormous respect for the work that they're doing. Those guys, in one sense, are a small group. I think we have about 30. Is that right? About 30 teachers?
Yeah, 30, I think.
In that region. But I think it's also worth noting that we also have teachers using, to some degree, the model I described. Some of it, not necessarily every feature of it, but some of its features. We have over 3,000 classrooms in the UK and actually all around the world who are working to some degree with a model like that, whether it's in a flipped or a blend or a self-paced humanistic learning style. They are moving along that journey to students being able to access resources in the way that we just described. So look, I mean, for you guys, what would we expect if there's teachers out there listening to that today? They're going to have criticisms, concerns, thoughts, shocks even. What's going to be on people's minds when they hear a model like that?
I think sometimes some teachers, maybe the main concern may be relying too much on technology.
Mm-hmm.
For example, having computers too present in the classroom, and letting go their teaching to rely on a computer to do it for them. I think some teachers will see it this way.
Okay, I think it's a really interesting point, and I guess there's 2 points there. One is the kind of the freedom point around the students, and the second one is the kind of the giving up of certain roles to technology. So let me take the student one first of all. It's really important we say that the space that students are that we've just described is not a free-for-all. It's not like they can walk into the classroom and they can do anything they want. Within that context, the way we do it is, on average, we set 10 targets for a 2-week period per student. And the student absolutely must meet those 10 targets. It could be 12, it could be 14, but give or take 10. And they must meet those targets, which are tasks, at the level of mastery, or you can call it perfection or full marks or whatever word you want to use. At the level of mastery, they must meet it within that 2-week period without fail. But within that framework, in that 2 weeks, they can take any order and pacing that they want, but they must arrive at least at that point within that designated time frame. The other point you made there, Marta, which was about sort of letting go, I guess you might loosely call it. Mm-hmm. You're right. We are saying that one specific behaviour of the teacher should be let go, and we think that thing that should be let go is one pace fits all transmissions from the front or the side or the back of classrooms. Let me put my cards on the table and advocate now today for what I think will be forever, that teachers should let that go, because it doesn't work, and because it treats people as an average. It treats people not as an individual. Research shows that the average one pace fits all lecture, let's call it that, or transmission, goes at the pace of the 21st percentile learner. That means that 79% of students to some degree are going too slow, and 20% of students to some degree are going too fast, and 1% of learners is going to some degree at the correct pace. Now, I don't think that's very efficient. The other thing I'd say on that is that transmission of information, let's call it PowerPoint and let's call it teaching from the whiteboard, all that stuff, Prezi, whatever tools you happen to use. We are saying that is one of the most mechanistic roles that a teacher can be asked to do within any education system, to stand in front of a group, to control that group, and to tell them what their ideas or what the knowledge is. We think that we would like to elevate the skill level of teachers far higher than that behaviour. So as provocative as that is, that's our stance on that. So I unflinchingly say to you, Marta, yes, we think that teachers in their own time should let go of that behaviour.
It's kind of funny that that's the first thing that lots of teachers say, that we would like to replace their job.
Mm.
So, well, just that small part of it, yes. But it's funny how we we assume that is the job of the teacher, that the presenter, that their job is to stand at the front and deliver information from their head to the heads of the students, and to play some role in facilitating like worksheets being given out and managing the logistics of a classroom. But it's kind of not a very aspirational stance of what a teacher does. So personally, I have no problem and highly unapologetic about the fact that we would like to replace that role of a teacher with a teacher on a device. I don't think teachers lose out at all by not being that personality in the room. There are some people who like to be that personality.
I loved it,
but that's not the point. Whether you like it or not isn't what determines whether it's good for the students. So have no time for the fact that you like it. Do amateur dramatics or something different which uses those skill sets which you will enjoy, but don't use that in the classroom and claim that that's the best way that students learn, because it's clearly not. And I think as soon as teachers can think about that concept and wrap their head around the fact that is probably not actually the part of their job that they are enjoying the most, not that I'm speaking for anybody else other than myself, but it's probably not the bit that people actually really enjoy doing the most. What's far more enjoyable most of the time is to sit with a student one-to-one and actually feel like you're having an impact on that individual, and being able to see the penny drop and see the reaction on that individual student's face. All of those things where you have a direct interaction with students.
Because you've got the time, because you don't have to be explaining it to everyone at the same time. So that allows you the time to have more of those penny dropping situations where you can have one-to-one with certain
many
students.
of the pioneers are reporting that they have between 70 and 100% of their lesson time interacting with students.
I'm going to repeat that, Mike, because just in case anybody happened to switch on another aspect of your device or not listen at that moment, the group of 30 teachers who are actively using this model with us ongoing are reporting that on average they have between 70 and 100% of their lesson time interacting with individual learners. And I want that to land with everybody, because that is unbelievably powerful. I also want to say we are looking at your question there as well, Marta. Should we replace the teacher delivery in the classroom with a teacher delivery through a device? Remember, just the delivery. I'm not talking about any of the other stuff. The other thing we have to remember is that the teacher asking that question could be the best teacher in the country, could be the best teacher on the planet. And if that's the case, your students are super fortunate that you happen to be their teacher, and that the average teaching episode quality that they get from you is very, very high. But by definition, if we look across an entire system, the average teacher is teaching the average class, and they're getting an average quality of transmission, which is available once, and it's available at a group pace. And what we're saying, just for the transmission, is that we can take theoretically the best teacher on the planet, and I'm not saying I'm that, but in my I'm just saying, I happen to be one of the first people to do it, but we theoretically can find the best teacher on the planet to teach every learner just the transmission at the pace that suits the learner, repeated as often as the learner wants, and at the pace challenge level which suits the individual. Now, if somebody wants to come back to us on that and challenge that, I am very open to it, but structurally that is so advantageous as a model that the tendency for better output, for increased learning, is for more confidence in learners, more experience of success. The chances are so high structurally that it's very, very difficult to argue against that model. Now, I'm not suggesting videos that tutorial is the only way. In the future, we might have another way, and that's part of what this podcast is about. If someone produces a better way of delivering that transmission outside of old Jimbo over here getting a digital pen and writing on a digital blackboard, great, that's wonderful, and let's explore that and take that further. But as of now, we're arguing that is the best way, and as you said with the technology, Marta, is the most reliable way. What about cost, Mike? Marta said here about technology in the classroom. Surely this model is super expensive. How can we be sitting arguing here that every classroom should have devices and be done this way? It's going to increase education cost by 4 times, isn't it?
No. So the expensive element of it is seen to be the devices. If you say you're going to have 8 to 10 iPads in your classroom. Some schools, some teachers will say that that's just not feasible, and it may not be feasible for that teacher. So that's a reality. But it's a very short-term view for somebody to just say, "Oh, we can't afford 8 iPads." Okay, fine. The money is available. We're not in a poor country.
No.
There are certain areas of the country where that's going to be difficult to find that money, and that's a potential barrier. But it's a detail on the grand scheme of things, because almost every classroom let's rephrase that. The majority of classrooms in the UK secondary schools have an interactive whiteboard. So the money was found from somewhere when somebody decided that was the tool of the future that people were going to use, and
the
it was going to
irony of the name.
Yeah, that we were going to. Everybody was going to gain so much from, and was going to benefit so much from the fact that you could move things around on the whiteboard
and PowerPoint presentations.
Yeah, which didn't really work. I mean, literally, most of the whiteboards didn't really work. And,
that's also true.
And
calibration.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Who's taken the pens?
So, my point is that those bits of kit were very expensive, and the money was found when people valued it. So, if we value this model, we'll find money for devices. Of course, those whiteboards, those expensive interactive whiteboards, are no longer needed. So it's not like you need to have those on top of your iPads. I'm not sure how much money those things are worth now. If every school was to sell them on eBay, it probably wouldn't.
Yeah. And in most cases, you've got to chuck the projector in as well, and changing the bulbs, which £100 each. And
I was just going to add that. I mean, at least in the UK, many schools already run programs like Bring Your Own Device, or they even provide devices to their students. So I think it's quite, I'm not too unrealistic when I think that the average secondary school in the UK does already have a presence of some sort of laptop or tablet. And in this case, even the cheapest, simplest device will do. You don't need anything super, you just need to be able to get to an internet browser. And that's
I must put in there, Marta, forgive me, but I can't emphasize this strongly enough. Mike mentioned iPad. I don't know what they cost these days, 300 quid, 250, something like that. We are not talking about the use of a device. Like, if you want them and you can afford them, fine, get them, whatever, they're nice. But we are talking about a device which can do one thing. It provides a screen and it provides internet access. Now, from my most recent research, to get something which is going to last 2 to 3 years, that's going to cost around about £70 per device. And we are arguing that those devices, let's say you've got 25 students in your class. We are not talking about having 25 of those devices. I would say in that case, at the absolute maximum, you should have 8 or 9. And the reason for that is, in the model that I've just advocated, scarcity is very, very, very important. This is not all kids looking at devices all lesson. This is all kids having or using a device for 1/4 of their educational experience in the classroom. So 3/4 of the educational experience in terms of the other 3 areas are non-screen time. In fact, we think it's a responsibility of all schools to limit screen time for young people, but to use that screen time in a really, really, really effective way, taking the best of the internet, which is, I think, right now getting the best teachers on the planet to every learner, and smashing it together with the best features of a classroom. And those best features are social experiences, having one-to-one access to your teacher and teacher to their learners, being able to challenge diagnostically those things which you're really stuck on, being able to improve, having access to resources. Those things are the strength of true learning classrooms. So I would say with confidence that you must not have one device per student per classroom. It would be wasteful to the extreme. So the other thing is, by having, say, 25 students, and let's say 8 devices for argument's sake, the planning that the student has to make within their target, their targets for 2 weeks might include 3 tutorials online. They have to plan when they're going to do those things, and that develops skills in the learner of organisation, time management, self-reliance, taking an opportunity. It's free now, I'm going. And it also means that they'll often explore ideas and tasks before they've been taught it, and that develops intuition in a concept because they haven't been taught it yet. They take an activity based on that concept and then they confirm it with the teaching sometime later. So on the cost thing, I think per classroom we are talking about a capital spend of well under £1,000. It's achievable.
One of the things we're going to do in this podcast inevitably is flip between a problem which we face now and a problem which we face in 5 or 10 years.
Yes.
And we're going to make certain assumptions based on what's going to be the reality in a few years. So we're going to kind of flip between the now and the sort of medium to this, to near future, I guess. So one of the assumptions we're going to make when we talk about this model is that those devices are available. And I think for a huge number of schools, teachers, students in the UK, those devices are already available or can be available with some persuasion. For a minority, they won't be available right now, and it may take more persuasion or more money or whatever to get those devices. But it's almost an inevitability that every student will have those devices available in a certain single-digit number of years, probably.
Yeah.
So I think we can be comfortable about making that assumption, given the fact that we may have some teachers who listen to this and say it's just not a reality for those, and we recognise that, and sympathise with it, and would like to have the conversation about how other people have managed to find the funding or how they've managed to make it work. But we'll make the assumption most of the time that those devices are available and that funding issue hasn't been a problem, unless we say otherwise or somebody gets in touch and claims otherwise.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't feel that, maybe I'm speaking from a privileged position, but it doesn't feel that far away, that unrealistic that a small number of devices would be available for a class of students in the UK.
I think it's important for us to honour the fact that there is still a minority of people today that don't, for example, have internet at home or a device at home. We call that the digital divide. Schools and classrooms and teachers need to be prepared to manage that. It's probably going to be linked in terms we would use in the UK. I'm sure there's slightly different terms elsewhere, but we would use sort of ideas of pupil premium, free school meals, where you're more likely to get that context. And that is a real thing. So we're not saying that isn't real. That is absolutely real, and teachers need to be sensitive to that and make sure that if a digital aspect of their educational offer does become more prominent, then of course they have to take that into account. But the other thing is, we could get distracted to think that this is a technological show, that this is a tech show. Remember what I said before? We're looking at for the small amount of device usage, you're looking at the smallest, the simplest device possible until there's a reason to have a more technical one. Secondly, if we talk about technology, it's because of the impact that technology has on learning and the learner. So I'm going to tell you right now that I have no interest in technology in the classroom unless it has a humanizing impact on the learner, on the classroom environment, and on the teacher. And if we look at whizzy-dizzy stuff that could in 50 years' time be relevant, we're not going to be interested in that, because we're interested, if in 2 years' time it's going to have an impact, we probably would be interested. But we're interested in things which are viable and can be achieved. What we've just talked about in terms of the classroom model as we have it today is a teacher and students, which I'm pretty confident we can already do that. We're talking about tables and chairs, pretty confident we can already do that. And we're talking about, about £1,000 worth of tech. And I'm pretty damn confident we can do that. So in terms of the resistance or the barriers to this possibility, they're there. The other thing, and I want to repeat it here, I think it's super, super important, is we're not precious about this model. This is the model as it exists today. We're recording this at the start of April 2018. This is the model which is developed over the last 2 to 3 years. We know it's going to be different in 2 to 3 years' time. We expect it to be different. This whole show is about the model growing and improving and developing, and us learning from people who might have completely different ideas to us and can influence us in that way. So if you do work in education and you've got a brilliant concept for the classroom and you think you could challenge us with it, for goodness sake, get in touch, because we want to hear from you and we want to know what that concept is. And if it's right, we will endorse the hell out of it, because we want those ideas to get to where it matters, to the end user, to the learners. So we have that position also. Okay, so we should kind of start to wind this up, because I think we're about 45 minutes in, which is what I was going to kind of aim for. Unless you guys want to go a bit longer, do you?
I'm happy to go longer, but whatever. Yeah.
Marta's shaking her head. She
No
done. Marta's thinking about getting a coffee. What my email's doing. So. I want to kind of make a summary here. I'm really proud to be part of this podcast. I have to say, just on a personal level, I really enjoy the conversation. I enjoy the challenge. I enjoy explaining these things. We want to hear from people. We want to engage with people. We want to invite people in to come and join us and take part in this. And I'm going to offer one last little nugget here. And actually, I'm going to ask you to answer this, Marta. Where we haven't planned this question, so this is for you. Marta's already going to kill me for this. Yep. Marta, bearing in mind what's happening with us and our work and our location, where is Classroom 21?
Ooh, I would imagine it being.
I mean, does it exist
next to Classroom 20?
In between 20 and 22? Or it might be the odd number
maybe
thing.
Opposite, yeah.
Or maybe 2 stands for the second floor. It's like 2.1.
Yeah, of course, it would be second floor necessarily.
It's on the second floor.
It's on the second floor.
But where is our class?
Or it could even be on the first floor if the ground floor is numbered as 1.
That happens.
That happens, and it's very disconcerting.
That's disappointing.
Causes chaos with the elevator.
So where is Classroom 21? Can people visit Classroom 21?
I'm sure Classroom 21 is already available in some of the schools where some of our pioneers work. And I'm going to ask the question
in a different way. Marta, when we move offices,
does
Classroom 21 exist?
Oh yes, it's going.
Tell us about it.
Well, we are planning a move to much bigger setting than where we are now, which is tiny. And as part of that, we only want part of that to be our office. I would say as a very small part of that. And the vast majority of that space is going to be devoted to creating Classroom 21, to creating a classroom so that teachers who are thinking about introducing this idea and running their groups in the model of Classroom 21 can come, visit us, see it for themselves. What can they do? Is it difficult? What does it entail? Do I have to get lots of new equipment, as we were discussing? And probably realize that, well, actually I've got most of what I need. I've already got it. So yes, I would say it is going to be existing very soon.
And that's within the next month, we believe. We're actually going to physically build Classroom 21. So just to be clear to all of you who are our super fans by the end of this podcast, as I would refer to them, you are already one of our 1,000 true fans if you've got to the end of this show. Let me be clear to you. We are going to discuss this model. We're going to debate it. We're going to refine it. We're going to invite people in who are going to challenge us on it. We're going to invite Ofsted people in to say, this is how we would see it. We're going to invite head teachers, say, well, have you thought about it? We're going to invite innovators, influencers, educators. We're going to invite the best of Twitter. We're going to get these people in who are going to come and influence this classroom model. And what's our promise to you? We're going to share those discussions with you. We are going to publish annually the best version of the model as we are humanly capable within our team to produce for you. And moreover, we are going to build Classroom 21 so you can come and visit it and be a teacher and or a student in Classroom 21 at a time of your choosing, so you can see it happen, including, if we can work it out, you bring in your students to Classroom 21 and taking part in it, if we're able to figure that out in enough time. So for me, this is the start of a really, really, really exciting journey. We don't completely know what's going to happen. We don't completely know where it's going to go, but it's something we're really looking forward to. And I'm going to make my last point, even though I'm going on a big monologue here. I meant to say it earlier. I think this is really important. We, as a team, are not particularly interested in trying to influence and tweak the current educational model. Mike touched on this earlier. He said, if you keep patching over the model, you end up with, a kind of a car built in the 1900s, or in turn of the 20th century, that's covered in supercharged and turbo boosters and spoilers, but underneath it's still a car that was built in 1900. And what we're interested in is completely offering or offering a completely alternative vision for what that classroom can be, and it's going to be so compelling and obvious that people will move towards it because it's too obvious not to. And that's our mission.
Easy.
That's it. So that's all we're trying to do. So look, I'm gonna say thanks and goodbye, and wish you a very good day wherever you are. Have fun. From you guys too.
Thanks.
Yep.
Enjoy. Bye bye.
Yeah, bye.
All the best, guys. Take care.